considerations in selecting vocal verbal targets to improve communication skills. My name's Amy Four. I'm the facilitator for this presentation, so if you need anything, let me know. I'll be sitting in the front here. There's another helper, Heidi. She's in the back at the door, so if you need anything, let us know. A few announcements. The Children's Institute will be putting on a performance on Thursday at 3 o'clock in room 108. I think it's the Emperor's New Clothes or something, supposed to be really good. The exhibit hall is open until 5 today. Iser de Leon will be presenting recent developments at the BACB from 4:15 to 5:15 today. I think that's in Presidents 1 and 2. Remember, in order to get continuing education credits, you must complete and hand in a verification form at the registration desk prior to leaving on the last day of attendance. This is where you will put the codes given at the end of each presentation. You can access the PowerPoint and any handouts for this session via the conference website or Groupio app. We are asking that upon the completion of each presentation, you give us feedback for that session, also via the Groupio app. And without further ado, it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Barbash.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you, Amy, and thanks for coming. It should be an interesting session. It always is when we have a lot of speech pathologists and behavior analysts in the room. I don't know if we also have parents, OTs, PTs, administrators, classroom teachers, and so on. But let me just make a couple comments about overall. I think what you're trying to do in teaching somebody to talk is probably one of the hardest things you'll ever do. If it were easy to learn how to talk, I'd be able to speak German because I was there for 2 weeks last summer, but it isn't. It looks easy, but we'll take a look today at learning to talk in kind of some in-depth pieces, and I think we'll cut the kids a break afterward, the kids that we work with that are trying to learn to talk, because I think often we make two mistakes. Number one, we expect too much progress too soon, and number two, we set the bar too high and we don't practice enough. I guess that's three. I think that's one of the reasons that augmentative and alternative communication systems are so attractive. And I certainly think they're important while we're working on speech or whatever other communication mode we're working on. We need something as a bridge and we need something as a placeholder. But I will say that if you've been at this with a particular child for 3 or 4 years and you're not getting any place, you're just probably getting started. But a way to fast track it, I've found, is to look at how much kids talk on a daily basis, typically developing children, count all those thousands of practices, and then ask yourself how many trials of echoic vocal man, vocal tax are you doing? If you're not doing 2,000 or 3,000 a day, you're probably wasting your time. You're probably not looking at it realistically. Kids need practice, and so let's talk about what we're going to cover today. Kind of have a little bit of a lead-in. We really want to focus on the title of my talk for just the first few slides. So if this were speech, tell me whether or not, or just kind of think about, could I echo this? Because this is what speech looks like. It's what speech sounds like. That's how fast it goes. You can't grab it. It's there and then it's gone. And then it changes, and you see how one thing is influenced by another. It's a fleeting, difficult stimulus and set of stimuli. So if we look at all of those colors and movement as speech responses, we see that they're very fast and that they're altered by other responses. If we kind of look at them in a different way as the auditory stimuli produced by speech responses, we see that the stimuli are fleeting. They're here, they're gone, we can't grab onto it. It's not like a word that's in text that you can keep right there. It's not like a puppy that you can hold and is still there, it's gone. And so asking kids to hit that target when they're blindfolded, essentially, the target's not there anymore. I can't see the target, I can't hear the target. How do I can't remember. I think that's why foreign language learning programs have so much emphasis on, in fact now, Duolingo will slow down the sentence. You can hear the sentence in real time, and then you can hit a button and the speaker will say it in kind of stretched out slow-mo. And there's a reason for that. We need that kind of stimulus sometimes in order to recreate it, in order to echo it. And then as we'll talk about today, the stimuli are variable. An S sound in the word sun doesn't sound like the S sound in the word box. Believe it or not, it doesn't. It's a different S sound than the S sound in the word school. And there are reasons for that speech pathologists understand very well. I think what we'll talk about, one of the things that I wanted to embed in this today is the vital importance, in my opinion, of an integrated, interdisciplinary approach among all of the people that are providing speech and language or communication services. In the first part of my life, I worked professionally as a speech pathologist, and then I decided to go back to grad school and get my PhD in behavior analysis with Jack Michael at Western Michigan University. And it was at that time that, well, actually it was before, it was when I met Mark Sundberg and my husband, who's a behavior analyst, Dr. John Esch, and all of kind of their friends and cohort in grad school, when they were in grad school, that I began to see that I knew an awful lot as a speech pathologist, but I didn't know anything about functional verbal behavior. I was baffled, I was surprised. How come that child can point to the cup when I say cup, but if I hold it up, he doesn't, and say, what's this, he doesn't say cup. Or what if I hold it up and say, what's this, and he says cup, and then I put it down and I say, tell me something you drink out of, and he doesn't say cup. The only thing that I had was my theoretical and conceptual background from a traditional perspective, my training as a speech pathologist, that he didn't have the concept yet. And yet when I learned about behavior analysis and stimulus transfer, those of you who have a behavior analytic background know very well that you can fix that problem in about 30 seconds. And then you can continue to reinforce the correct response to harden that skill. So, so both of these are important. Vocalization for speech purposes, but to what end? For what purpose? We don't just work on echoics, we work on echoics at this level for our early language, early speech learners. We work on echoics to support the development of Mann's tags, interverbals, and other verbal behavior. So today, this is not a workshop in learning how to do it. It's not a therapy training workshop. We're going to talk about some considerations that I don't know whether you've thought of before or not, but I'll present you with some in selecting vocal verbal targets. People tell me that they don't like to, people who aren't speech pathologists find it very difficult. They'll say, this is the one area that I really kind of can't wrap my head around. You know, I'm a good behavior analyst, but I don't know what targets to select. So hopefully at the end of today, you'll have a good idea. We're going to talk about some critical background information about how speech is learned and who should select the targets. And then we're going to take a look at 5 selection tools. We'll draw a distinction between vocalizing and vocal verbal targets. What are those? Vocal responses are responses that are generated by the vocal cords. And if it's not generated by the vocal cords, we can't call it vocal. Verbal responses are responses that are meaningful or functional. Now, they can be both, and here's how. So we have on the top activities using musculature related to speaking. We have coughing, humming, crying, burping, screaming. That's vocal, but it's not verbal. Whispering is not vocal. You don't use your vocal cords for whispering, but it is verbal. It communicates meaning, or there's function. Making sounds like p, t, k, ch, f, s, and th is neither vocal nor verbal. Making raspberry sounds is not vocal unless the vocal cords kind of go along with the air that's puffing out. Yodeling is vocal, certainly, but not verbal. Speaking or singing words is both vocal and verbal. Activities using musculature unrelated to speaking doesn't mean that it's not communication, it's not verbal, but these activities, writing, sign language, fingerspelling, Morse code, and Braille, is verbal but not vocal. You can see the areas that we're concerned with verbal behavior, and what we're trying to do is get that vocalizing going via speech, and that's in the last row before the right up here, that we're going to be talking about today. So these are speech learners, and I don't know whether a quick look at these pictures will kind of tell you what strikes me whenever I'm working with these kids, and we'll come back to that in just a second. The kids that come to us, and they're not always kids, usually fall into one of these 4 categories. The ones that aren't making any response to an echoic model. And then we have the kids that will say something every once in a while, but it's inconsistent. So if I did 100 echoic trials, they might say something after 30 or 40 or 2 of those trials. So that's not going to be a good basis for speech. That's not enough. What we're looking for is some kind of a response every single time to the echoic model. And in the beginning, we don't care whether it's right or not. So for those first 2 areas, those are the kids that are still practicing sound making. And if you have any people who fall into that category, you'll be particularly interested in the things I talk about today about how about whether or not we need to hurry that process or facilitate it happening in a more broad way. And then those who are making an inaccurate response to an echoic model, and those who have some articulation problems, we call that poor echoic transfer. They can say it perfectly when you say it, but then if you don't say it, you leave out the echoic model and it sort of goes back the way it was before. Those kids are talking, and we want them to acquire functional speech. In other words, we want to get rid of the echoic prompt. So chronological age is not a good indicator of whether or not somebody's going to learn to talk. What is a good indicator is how much practice time have they had. So if I have a person referred to me who's 20 and is not talking, and they say, should we give up on working on speech? I say, how long have you been working on it? How much does this person vocalize during the day? that's the first question to ask, because we would ask it whether the person was 2 or whether they were 22. That's the indicator. Do they have the mechanical skills, the raw material that you can then build mands and tacts and so on, verbal behavior on top of that? So here are today's topics. We're going to quickly identify who the team is that's the appropriate team to work on target selection. And when I say target selection, I'm talking today about speech targets. We're going to review for some, and for others this will be speech therapy 101, maybe even 201. Sometimes people say, ooh, that got a little detailed there. Some must-know basics. Just as behavior analysts would say that speech pathologists should learn about discrimination training and verbal behavior, functional assessment with respect to verbal behavior, and verbal conditional discriminations and reinforcement and prompting, and all of those sorts of things that they would encourage other fields, particularly we're talking about people that are working on developing speech, they would encourage that because those are necessary pieces of learning, necessary techniques from the behavior analytic literature. Speech pathologists would also say, do you know what co-articulation is? Do you know what normal speech and language looks like? Do you know which sounds should come before other sounds or typically do? Do you know how to juxtapose one vowel with a consonant and why not to do that sometimes? Why you should put it with a different one? So we all have a responsibility. And then we'll take a quick look, well, it won't be a quick look, I think it'll be probably the second half of the afternoon. 5 tools for target selection to help us define the appropriate targets. If you don't know about these tools, hopefully they will allow you when you leave the workshop to at least have some information that you can then begin to plan a speech program. The first tool is the naive listener test. The second one is an echoic assessment. The third is a sound acquisition sequence checklist that I wrote. You could write one too, but this one it's not, it's an informal sort of a test. Tool number 4 is the ability to write shell progressions for shaping. And tool number 5, we'll talk a bit about vocal verbal skills. How do we move from an echoic response to something that has some meat to it? Mand skills, tact skills, and we'll mostly just talk about mands and tacts today, since this is not a skill building workshop. Okay, the target selection team, there they are. You probably, all of you in this room, fall into one or another of those categories, one or more. And if you don't, and you're here, you're interested in speech development and selecting speech targets, I would say I would call yourself a teacher. I think we're all teachers when it comes to working on communication skills. Who's responsible for this? Well, we all have responsibility. And why do we all have responsibility to work on communication skills? Speech and language is a social skill. We don't just make sounds. We don't continue to babble to no end for all of our lives. We go through a babbling period as mechanical practice for the real meat and potatoes of communication, which is occurring always in a social context with another listener, or sometimes we're our own listener. We're our speaker and our listener. They're within the same skin. That's called the verbal community, that social context, that social community, and we're all members of this person who isn't speaking or speaking well. We're all members of that person's verbal community. So interdisciplinary collaboration among all of us is a great advantage. These 2 monographs that came from ASHA are available on a website that I'll show you in just a moment. I think they're available on the website. They are examples of publications in a speech pathology journal by behavior analysts. And there was, I don't know whether you're aware of it or not, but in the old days, 60s and 70s, there was quite a bit of cross communication between these two fields. And it was positive, it was productive, and you'll find many pieces of interest in the literature. This is an early article by Hart and Risley that was published in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, and you see they're talking about descriptive adjectives. That sort of falls within the area of speech and language, and so there has been collaboration. I won't go through these because you have them in your handout, or I mean in your slide. But just note that we have books as well as peer-reviewed journals that go within these two, across these two disciplines. The Speech Pathology and Applied Behavior Analysis Special Interest Group of the Association for Behavior Analysis International has a very active website and social media presence. We have the folks that are largely responsible for that here in the front row. And so if any of you are interested in talking with them further, you can check with them after or at the break. They regularly post many, many things that are of an interdisciplinary, collaborative nature. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. So now it gets hard. We have to take a look at, if we're going to be a teacher, what do we have to know? We have to know how and when and where to do all of these things. We have to know what the current skills are and where to set the bar. You might ask yourself as I'm going through this, do I know that? Am I pretty good already at doing that? Because if I'm not, maybe that's one area that I need to pinpoint to beef up my skills in. We need to know how to differentially reinforce. Is that response better than the one that was before? We need to know how to not only prompt, everybody's really good at prompting usually, but how do you fade those prompts and transferring the stimulus control from an echoic to a mand and getting rid of the prompts to do that successfully. We have to know how when and where to reinforce any vocalization for the really early learners. Anything that comes out of their mouth is wonderful. And then to reinforce specific vocalizations, which is differential reinforcement. We have to know how to increase syllable length requirements. That's not necessarily an area of training for behavior analysts if they haven't taken a workshop like this or done a lot of reading. These are important background pieces of information. We'll talk a bit about that today. Selecting vocal mand and tact targets. Behavior analysts are very good at doing that. And so I think are many speech pathologists, most speech pathologists that I've talked with at my various workshops and so on. I think that there's been a real sea change in the past 10 or 15 years with people recognizing the value of our separate fields and preparation bodies of knowledge that we have. And then, speaking of shaping, how to write shell steps so that we can shape better articulation. And we'll talk about that within the sequential checklist, the sound acquisition sequence checklist today. So, given all that hard stuff that we have to know, it's true that team members may not all have equivalent teaching skills. So we need both of these folks to come into the picture. They may not, once they're in the picture, agree on what should be identified as a priority. We have to identify the form. What are the next topographies? That's the form of whatever it is we're asking them to learn. We have to identify function, and we need to do that in order to be able to assess, select targets, probe, and then move the program forward. Excuse me just a moment. I want to get my my watch out. My watch. We all have one of those, right? Yeah. Okay. Now, here's a good example of this collaboration among all these professionals. Specifically, I think we're talking about the two primary fields of prep, behavior analysis and speech pathology, is discrimination training. And the reference for this example is on your slide. Let's say that you're trying to teach this child to say both ma-di and ma-do. We won't talk about why we might want to do that. But, and the child is having difficulty doing that. So we know that we need to do discrimination training. How do we do it? We need to focus not on the part that's the same, not on the whole word, but we need to pinpoint the stimulus difference and help the child begin to listen to the difference between the D and the do, and then fade in the ma part. So we would actually train the difference between D and do, train differential responding to that, and then begin to fade up the auditory signal of the ma part until we get the two that we want. That was one small example. The team members can all support skill acquisition, and we should. How do they do that? They have to understand these strategies. These are the strategies that will enhance the assessment of articulation and the acquisition, and these strategies are based on behavior analysis. We do preference assessment and man training to make sure that our programs, speech acquisition programs, are motivating for kids. They're in play and leisure, natural settings. We reinforce in the beginning almost anything they say, and then we differentially reinforce new responses by raising the bar. We use the strategy of prompts, fading prompts, time delay, and we simplify the instructions. I think these are things that you may do and you may not realize that you're doing them, but when you're collaborating in an interdisciplinary way, you want to look for these skill sets and make sure that team members feel supported in acquiring those skill sets if they don't have them. And then working together to evaluate program effectiveness. We're going to take a look at the basics of speech acquisition and how to use the 5 tools. So the summary point on teamwork is that we all have a responsibility for helping people learn to communicate. There are a set of skills that we call speech teaching. One of them is how to assess. How do I even know what this child is saying? Do I have an organized way of writing down what's coming out of their mouth so that will then guide me what I need to do next? Do I know how to assess verbal function? Can I analyze the contingencies so that I can transfer the skill from a man to a tact, from an echoic to a man to a tact? And then the background knowledge of typical speech development and appropriate speech target sequences. Okay, so let's run through the basics. And the first step is to recognize that speech is muscle movement. A speech response produces, the muscles move, it makes a sound, makes an auditory stimulus, produces that. The learner observes the sound. It sounds right for some reason. We'll talk about how that happens on the next slide. And then, if it sounds right, the reinforcing value of hearing that same sound again increases. So how does that work? Mark Sundberg describes this in many of the things that he's written as a 2-stage process, a vocal-verbal process, if you will. And if you look at the S big R, S little r, that means reinforcement. Lots and lots of pairings with hearing mama, dada, and other kinds of things that come out of the caregiver's mouth. So while they're receiving care, food, rocking, warmth, dryness, all of the wonderful things that are reinforcing to the child, they're also hearing this initially, possibly, neutral stimulus that we call human voice. That pairing establishes value for those sounds. And then the second stage of the process is reinforcement. We know that babies make random vocalizations. They say all kinds of things. Some of it, most of it doesn't make a whole lot of sense early on, but some of them have this pairing history. And the ones with a pairing history will be selected out into the repertoire, and the others will begin to drop off. We see this happen across languages. And so this is why if you are a baby of parents from the US and you are growing up in France and your caregivers are your parents, even though you're in France, you're going to start to speak English because that's what you're hearing. Those are the pairings that have been established. So reinforcement helps us get lots of sounds. This is the task. If you have a learner that isn't making lots of sounds, then this is where we need to start. The first step, get lots of sounds. Step number 2, turn it into functional speech. Doesn't sound very hard, but we know, of course, it takes years sometimes to do that. With children with a diagnosis of autism, what does that mean? We don't have a blood test for autism. We don't have right now, maybe we will in the future, some objective medical test, chemical test, biological test that we give. We give that name to a set of behaviors. And one of those is that children who pay attention differently to stimuli, not in a typical way, they're inattentive to some and they're over-attentive to others, and then they have some other qualifications. We label those sets of symptoms as autism. And so I think that's useful, that we're not coming from an assumption that they can't pay attention to these stimuli, these speech stimuli, these auditory stimuli, but for whatever reason, they're not. And so it's our job to help make it as salient as possible. Okay, so two areas of practice will get you to functional speech. One is mechanical, and the other one is actually practicing the function. What does this mean? Well, the first part of our life is a lot of sound-making practice, and very, very early on, we're not asking, what are parents doing? They're not asking children to point to things. They're not asking them, what do you want? They're giving lots and lots of echoic models. And as a result, we very early on establish an echoic skill. That echoic skill then can be used to train man's tax and interverbals and to get additional function from all of that hard work. Let's take a look at sound acquisition. Here are a couple of examples of 3-month-old children, and what you want to pay attention to is along the left side. This is what this video, by the way, is fine to show. Sorry. Human speech, my speech right now, all of your speech, it's strong and it's loud. There are lots of different sounds that we know how to use. We make those sounds fluently, and the sounds in words are precise. So you want to listen. Now this is after this baby has been on the planet for 90 days and has probably been practicing a good part of most of those 90 days, practicing the vocal signal. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. We have a weak little voice there. And keep in mind, 90 days of a lot of practice. Okay, so not much of what they're eventually going to need. Let's take a look at 6 months.
Yeah. Tell me more. Uh-huh. And then what did Daddy do? Yeah. Huh?
And another 6 months.
Hey, what you got to say? What you got to say, huh, boo? Quack, 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 quack. And then what happened? And then what happened? Quack, 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 quack. It's quack, 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 quack.
Okay, so a lot of skills at 6 months, but still there is not precision in words. So what have they been working on? They've been working on all of that sound making practice. So think about the children that you're trying to teach to learn to talk. Are they that fluent? Not are they that accurate, are they that fluent? Because if they're not, then you're trying to build a house with no glue. Well, what do you call that? Mortar for the bricks. You don't have all the raw materials. You may be working on sounds, but they're not fluent sounds. And we see that time and time again with children with a diagnosis of autism that have had the bar set too high initially. So we have to go back, and we're not trying to teach them to go blah, 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 but there are ways that we can have them say vowel sounds, general vocalizations, and then add consonants in such that they are meaningful. They're mand targets, they're tact targets, and so on. So we want to keep in mind that we're very, very tolerant of acceptably imperfect speech for years. Sometimes children at 3, 4, 5 years old still can't say their R's or their S's or their TH's or their J's or whatever, and we're just fine with that. I think I'll skip through these. It's just more cute children. But you can see that by 10 months we have and 18 months, but even by 10 months, lots and lots of change. Well, let me just play the 10-month-old, and then we'll flip over to. But mostly vowels. Okay, I have no idea what that child said. It sounded like words, but the sounds were not precise at all. I think I will show you a bit of the 18-month-old, and then we'll, because what I want you to notice is that now we're beginning to get some changes in how clear they are. So 18 months practicing hours a day at least. Let's say that you're working with a 7-year-old child with a diagnosis of autism that isn't speaking very much. What you might want to say to yourself is, okay, if I apply the typically developing history the sound-making history that I know is necessary for a typically developing child to acquire speech that's still this bad or that is only this good, however you want to look at it, maybe I will spend the next 18 months trying to help this child or speech learner who's 7 years old make that many sounds that many hours a day, and then I'll begin to worry that they're not saying it perfectly. So there's one strong take-home point from my perspective, and that is cut these kids a break and go back and pick up the thread of the sound-making fluency, that whole package that they need as a foundation to acquire the vocal skills that we want them to have. Look at the difference here at 18 months.
Kaden, can you say mama? Can you say dada? Dada. Can you say fish? Can you say cracker? Cracker. Can you say ball? How about car? Can you say car? Car.
Okay, so he just gets cuter as time goes on, so we'll skip that one. Let me show you a few sound development charts, speech development charts that the speech pathologists in the room probably see in their sleep. The resources I've listed there. There's an interesting commonality among all of these. So we're looking at this chart here from birth to 8 years, and you can kind of see the pink is girl acquisition and the blue is the sounds that are acquired typically by boys at that age. It's not so important that you can read all of the different sounds, but in general, what I'd like you to look at is what's happening right here from birth to 1 year. It's not that there's nothing happening, but there are no expected sounds to be developed. Now, what does expected mean? Expected means that we have observed that that's what most kids do. That's what a developmental chart is. And so what are they doing? They're practicing. They're practicing vocal control, how loud it is, the pitch changes, the duration of the vowels. They're repositioning the tongue. Remember the 3-month-old that was having trouble repositioning the tongue? She was using her jaw to try to move the tongue around. We still saw blah, 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 blah. You can say blah, 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 blah and not have to move your jaw that much. Why? Because you've learned to control your tongue in moving from one sound position to another one such that it moves fast enough for the kind of speech that we have. And after all of that, then we care about whether or not they can blend sounds together, vowels and consonants, and then we begin to work on the echoic. And you can see that from 4 to 8 years, they're still perfecting their echoic skills. And we see the same thing with many other, almost any speech development chart. Still, that birth to 2 years old, sometimes birth to 1, but usually birth to 2 is practice, 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 and there it is again. So what are the components of speaking? Well, there are 2 parts. One of those chunks is called segmental components. Those are the sounds that we make, vowels, consonants, diphthongs, 2 vowels together. And when we start to package that, a string of those, we call those syllables. And when we put a bunch of those together, we call those words. And these segmental components have the primary verbal function. That is, it means something. That's our goal. We don't just want people to make nonsense syllables. We want them to say syllables in some sort of a sequence, some sort of an order that the verbal community has agreed means something. What does that mean? That we are going to reinforce that in a particular way. In other words, mand function, tact function, interverbal function, and so on. And then there are these other components of speaking that we call suprasegmental, above the vowels, on top of the music of speech, the loudness of it, the pitch, the duration, whether or not your vocal cords are on and off. For example, you can understand in a secondary verbal function, which Skinner called the autoclitic function, you can understand that these two sentences, I'm giving you different pieces of information. I flew in from Michigan, let me make it more obvious. I flew in from Michigan yesterday. What did I not do? I didn't drive. I flew in from Michigan yesterday. I flew in from Michigan yesterday. Not today, not the day before, yesterday. I'm providing you with secondary information, autoclitic function, not through the words that I'm saying, the vowels and the consonants and so on, but through the emphasis, the pitch, the duration of the vowels, and so on and so forth. Very important. All of these components, the segmental and the suprasegmental, are controlled by our physiology, by our mechanical system that we have here. And we call all of those things the articulators because they help us articulate all of these components in the segmental and the suprasegmental area that we're trying to convey. There are a lot of subtleties in speech that we don't directly teach first early speakers, but if they're listening to that particular stimulus, they echo it and they then can do it appropriately. Nobody ever taught me this, but I learned how to do it. Some final sounds in words are voiced and some are unvoiced. And for the words that have the final sound that's voiced, the difference is not because it's voiced. The difference is because we hold the vowel in that word longer. Here's an example. When you say eyes, the final sound is voiced. Z, eyes. The only difference between eyes and ice is that the Z sound at the end of eyes changes to an S sound at the end of ice. That's the only phonetic difference. But the suprasegmental difference is that we barely perceive that when we're speaking quickly. We barely say eyes. We don't say it like that. We just say, her eyes were blue. How did you know I wasn't saying her ice was blue? Not because of the S and the Z, but because of the vowel duration. Eyes, ice. Please, please. Cab, cap. Subtle differences that we need to know about if we're trying to teach somebody how to speak correctly. So this information informs treatment. For example, let's look at bag and back. Again, final voiced sound for bag and an unvoiced for back. Let's say that we have a problem where the child is deleting that last sound. So he's saying ba instead of bag. What do? We don't even have to worry about that last sound. And in fact, when we do, lots of times it's overemphasized. Have you ever heard a child say bagga, dogga, and pigga or frogga? How did that happen? Overemphasis on the final deleted consonant. You can simply focus on the duration of the vowel, and you'll avoid that sound at the end. And you can simply accept the unvoiced sound at the end, back, for bag. and then later you can worry about the voice and voiceless distinction. It's the least of our concerns. So this little gal is singing the ABCs here. This video is also fine. She's 24 months old. And what I'd like you to look at is, you see the ABCs written in black, her actual response written in phonetics. So this is what she's singing, ba, he, e, and so on. I like the H-I-J-K, ba, 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 ba. Instead of, and then the correct response, I've written that in phonetics in the rows that are in yellow. So if you take a look at how many different vowels is she using, well, some, but look at all the missing consonants that there are. And she's kind of not making a stab at some of the vowels that one would think she could make. For example, if she can say ah, like in ba, how come she can't say I in the letter I? Well, let's take a look. You'll wanna see her sing this song. But listen to this. Sounds pretty normal for a 24-month-old. But 24 months of practice, and this is where she's at.
How old are you? Yeah, can you do ABCs?
And so on. So I especially love the LMNO. So here, if you look at the vowels along the left column, E, A, U, I, and O, in blue is what that song requires. It requires you to make that sound that many times throughout the whole song. And in red, we see what she actually emitted. So she's doing pretty well with the required E sound. We didn't get any A sounds, which is the third one down. We didn't get any I, that's a diphthong, two vowels together. We didn't get any which is a surprise. It's a midpoint vowel, almost the default position. If you open up your mouth and make a sound, you're probably going to get or and we didn't get the O either on that. But look at the Look at how there's a preponderance of use. There's an overuse of the sound The reason is because of what I just said. It's a default position in the mouth. It's right in the middle. You don't have to lift. You don't have to move your tongue around at all. You can just leave it there, and that's the sound that's going to come out. So this little schematic is available on the archives in a previous year as one of the handouts that I did in a workshop. But you can see the E sound, the U sound, we got a lot of E's and a few U's, but that sound, these are the three, what I like to call sort of the kingpin vowels. I really like to get those vowels in place because the rest of them are kind of in the neighborhood. We'll look at the schematic in a little while, but here's the four of those vowels, the E, A, and A. And if you just say them to yourself, you can kind of feel your tongue start at the bottom at and you can kind of feel it lifting up just a little bit. It still stays in kind of a central, but moving central to forward position. A, E. You can just feel your tongue moving up and down. That tongue has got to move. And the first thing that we see with a 3-month-old, and even mostly with a 6-month-old, is vowel acquisition. And so it helps to know how these are made, and they can't be prompted. You can't stick your fingers in there and poke around. This is going to be learned through auditory training. So now let's ask ourselves, what about accuracy and speed? Which one of those is most important when we're talking? Well, sometimes accuracy is more important than speed, and sometimes speed is more important than accuracy. I was listening to someone at Michigan State University years ago who was working in their artificial language lab on augmentative communication devices, and they had an adult graduate student guy there who had diagnosis of cerebral palsy and severe dysarthria. He wasn't able to speak. And so he was learning how to operate this AAC. And one of the tasks, they were taking data on how many milliseconds before the pizza place hangs up on you if you don't start talking. And they didn't even get to 1 second. It was that fast. If you didn't start speaking immediately when they said, hello, this is, can I take your order? So yeah, speed is very, very important, but at the cost of accuracy, I don't know, let's take a look. Let's listen to this little gal. This video is also fine. And I've written in phonetics what it is she's trying to say.
Start again. Very good.
Yay, finally. Okay, why are tongue twisters fun? They're fun because they're hard, and we're trying to say them really fast, and it's really difficult to do. It's a load on that system of both the segments that we're trying to say, the vowels and consonants all mixed in there together, and the supra-segmental is the duration. And so they're hard because those odd syllable combinations are not very typical, and you can write these yourself. So if they're not typical, what does that really mean? We haven't practiced them very much. I guess those are really the same thing. They require rapid tongue repositioning of within the oral cavity. So you can either say them slow and accurately, or you can say them fast, and there are inevitably going to be some inaccuracies. So here's what she's trying to say. She sells seashells. I loved it when she did that with her mandible by the seashore. Okay, so why is this hard? Well, moving from a voiced to an unvoiced position where your tongue stays in exactly the same position in your mouth can sometimes be a challenge. Going from z to s, just try it. Z, s, z, s, z, s. It's kind of tough. So that's one load on the system. Another one is moving from a voiced to an unvoiced, or in this case, an unvoiced sound to a voiced sound. No vocal fold movement at all for the SH sound. Shh. And now I have to turn them on to say E. And that goes back and forth on all of those connections that you see there in red. So lots of difficulty. And then we have where the red arrows on the top are, close but different tongue position. The SH with the S is what we're looking at there. Well, why is it hard to move from an S to an SH? Well, here's what the S position for the tongue looks like. on the left, and on the right is the SH. So if you look at the very small differences, moving your tongue from an SH position and lifting it, and slight forward movement of the tongue tip to get that S sound, and back again, back and forth, it's a difficult load on the system. So the misarticulations that we're hearing in general, and most especially in tongue twisters, but in general speech, we prefer fluency over accuracy. That's what we train children to do. Look at how the little girl had to slow down to say sea shells, to say that correctly. That's not functional. It's too slow. And she had to keep practicing over and over and over again. So we kind of make a deal in the verbal community with everybody in our community. Here's the deal with early speech learners: fluency over accuracy. They will sometimes affect intelligibility, but not too much.
Where's Kitty's house? Where's Kitty's house? Are you going to go in Kitty's house?
Yeah. Kitty, you okay? You okay? You okay? You okay? Hey, you okay? You will see there. You okay?
Good job. Okay, how does all of this happen? Let's run through our mechanics. And a speech pathologist, behavior analyst that many of us know, Joanne Gerenser, wrote an article that you have the reference for there, and she said the development of effective prompting strategies requires knowledge, requires knowledge of speech sound production as well as behavioral technology. How are we going to know how to prompt, when to prompt, how to teach if we don't understand both of these things? How is sound produced, and what can we do with our behavioral technology to affect that? So these are the main speech structures: lips, hard palate in yellow, soft palate. They're toward the back. The tongue is outlined in red. The throat is in blue, and the vocal cords, you can't see them very well in this sagittal section, but they're down at the bottom. Oftentimes people will try to prompt a child to make a particular sound like ooh, and they'll go like this with the lips, ooh. But even though you move the lips, the tongue might stay in the same position, because the difference, you can say ooh without really rounding your lips very much. The information, the ooh sound, is controlled by a different tongue position from ah, ooh, ooh, ooh. I'm minimally moving my lips, but you can perceive the difference in the sound. So the tongue position has to change. Some of you have seen this, but let me play just a little bit of it. You'll see another sagittal section of the tongue in orange. The soft palate is in green, and for vowels, it will close off the airway to the back of the back wall of the pharynx, or the throat, because we don't want the sound to come through the nose and have it sound like this. So you'll see that green moving back and forth. For some of these vowels, you'll see a little bit of mandibular movement, but not a whole lot. The tongue is doing it all. These are all vowels. Okay, so knowing how this mechanism is moving is going to help us in target selection. For example, let's say that the learner omits the T or the D or the N from syllables. Pick one, any one of those. So here's the tongue position for those three sounds. And if you make them yourself, you can feel it right behind your upper front teeth. T, D, N. They're all in that same position. Well, let's say that this same learner can say both the E sound and the sound, but they're not making the T or the D or the N sound. Which one of those vowels would you use to try to help the child learn to make either the D or the T or the N? How would you know which one? Well, here's tongue position for E at the top, and there's the tongue position for in the bottom picture. Which one would you choose? T. Sure. Why? Because the percentage play is that they're probably going to learn it faster. Why? Because their tongue is already close to that tongue position in the mouth. So here's what it looks like all connected.
When it comes to singing, I love to sing French art songs. It's probably my favorite type of song to sing. I'm a big fan of Debussy. I also love operas. I love singing Donizetti and Mozart and Strauss. But when I listen to music, I tend to listen to hard rock or classic rock music. And one of my favorite bands is AC/DC. And my favorite song is probably Back in Black, which I'll listen to over and over again in my room.
Goes fast. But you can appreciate that fluency or speed is paramount in communication, much more so than accuracy. It's intelligible enough. The speech pathologist in the room will recognize that she has a lisp, but we could still tell what she was saying. And so when you talk about acceptably imperfect, for years, she doesn't ever have to fix that lisp, and she's probably getting through life just fine, as are, I may say, many radio announcers. Okay, let's talk about co-articulation, and then I think we'll be getting fairly close to break time as we finish out this section. What is co-articulation? You got to know about it if you're going to be teaching somebody how to talk, because it informs how you select the targets, what targets you select. So here's the deal. All it means is that where you put your tongue to produce any sound at all, pick a sound, is affected by the requirements of the phoneme positions that are adjacent to that other one. So what does that mean? Let's say it in a different way. Tongue position for the same sound changes when it's preceded or followed by another sound. So let's take a picture of that. So here's any speech sound at all. You can think in your own head, possibly an example here. Maybe the S sound. So this figure is the acceptable perceived area acoustically for the S sound. So how far can I move my tongue around in my mouth before it doesn't sound like S anymore? Remember the picture of the S and the SH? Not very far. But you can still move it a little bit. And you can reconfigure the shape of your tongue depending on where it's been or where it's going. So this is a tongue position for an isolated sound, but let's just say that these sounds that I've put outside the circle is the next destination. Okay? That's where your tongue has to go next from that sound that's represented by the little red dot. Okay? Depending on what it is and where it is, what the requirements are, the S position that you make will be a little bit off dead center. It'll be a little bit different. It will move toward the next sound. And some of those move pretty far, but not so far that it's no longer perceived acoustically as that sound. Knowing this is helpful because this is why focusing on consonant articulation that's too specific is contraindicated for early speech learners if they're not yet producing fluent strings of syllables, because fluent stringing together of syllables will get rid of that problem. Intelligibility will happen. And so if you're asking a child to say, "I want cookie, please," and they can't do it, here's what people often do. They'll say I. Good. Say want. Right. Say cookie. And then the child says cookie. Say please. And the child says please. And then the child gets the cookie. Why is that contraindicated? If the child's having trouble stringing all those syllables together, I want cookie, please, 5 syllables together. If something drops out to such a degree that you don't have any clue what they said, you're working at that's too many syllables. You need to back up to 1 or 2 syllables, or maybe 3 syllables. And you can assess that with an echoic assessment by finding out, well, how many can they echo before it all goes south? And that's where I need to pinpoint my target selection. So let's take a look at, we're still talking about co-articulation. When we say this word right here, do we say water or do we say water in the United States? Well, sometimes I might say water. Did you say bother? No, I said water, or something where you're really trying to emphasize it. But in general, why do we say water? Why do we say the one on the right like it's W-A-D-D-E-R? Well, take a look at what your vocal cords have to do to say water. They're on well, actually, they're not on for the W. I guess that's an error there. They're on for the ah, and they're on for the but they're not on for the T sound. They are on for the D sound, on for water. So why do we do that? Because it saves time. We change our articulation to meet the demands of effective communication. We can either say it rapidly or we can say it precisely if we need to clarify something. Let's take a look at I want ice cream, please. Here it all is written in phonetics, and pay attention to what happens to this T sound. That's written exactly the way you would say it if you said it precisely, but here's how we say it fast. I want ice cream, please. Why did I do that? Why did I drop that T sound? Now, for those speech pathologists in the audience, yeah, I know that the N would be written slightly differently, but for our purposes here today, it saves time. It may only save a millisecond. Oops, sorry. It may only save a millisecond here, but it saved a little bit of time. So, consider the position of your tongue to say the word put. Put. And now say, put the key. Put the key. It's not the same position, but clearly you perceived the T sound in put the key. Even if you didn't know how to spell that, you would still hear, yeah, I didn't say put the key, put the key. No, there was a little bit of a T in there. Put the key, different than put. So, different tongue position, different TH position. Let's take put the key. Put the key, that TH sound is different than the TH in this is Teddy. Put the key, this is Teddy. There's a little bit of a difference in the amount of air that you expend. I hope somebody said Teddy is adorable. He is. Okay, let's take a look at mommy and daddy versus mommy and Katie. And I'd like you to focus on the N and the D right next to each other. N and D are both made in the front of your mouth, N and K are made one in the front, one in the back. Well, here's what it looks like. Here's the tongue position, another sagittal section from the right of the K sound. Look at how far back your tongue is. And this gold bar down there at the bottom is kind of representing your tongue, back of your tongue on the left, tongue tip on the right. Look at the tongue position for the N and the D sound. So for mama and daddy, we can leave our tongue right there. But what happens to the N if we have to say the K sound right after, mama and Katie? So here's mama and daddy, mama and Katie. The N and the D are right there in the front. Everything's cool with that. But what if I want to say mama and Katie? What do? I don't say mama and Katie. I don't say it like that. I don't want to have to slow down. So speed is of the essence in talking. Fluency is where we're going. That's why you don't want to teach your children to slow down when they're learning to talk. You want to teach them to speed up. And if something goes wrong, that is, they misarticulate, deal with the misarticulation. Don't deal with the speed initially. You need that fluency. Well, what happens to the N? We don't say N at all. We say NG. Mama and Katie. That's why we don't say thank you. We say thank you. That's why we don't say ink. We say ink. It's too slow if we say the N and then the K. Now, if we had to in a particular word where there's a syllable change, then we would, of course, do that. But these are some of the things that we do in co-articulation. Let's take a look at Mark's car does not start. So we have an S surrounded by two Ks. On the left, we know K is made in the back. The tongue has to be in a back position, up. And the S is embedded between two T's. We know the T is made in the front of the mouth. So what happens to that S? Well, there's the K and the G position. Here's the T position. And there is the S made very, very near where the T is, right? Except we don't touch. So what happens to that S when we say Mark's car? Mark's car. Well, the tongue moves back in the mouth. And you might not even feel it. You might not know it. You don't need to know it. But this is why we don't want to train an isolated position or at too easy, too simple of a syllable level when fluency is what we need for connected speech. So a tongue position for an isolated sound is right there. Red dot is S. But that kind of pink dot, it sort of goes off center, but we're still within the perceived acoustic okay region for the S sound, for it to be perceived acoustically as, yep, that's still an S sound. But it's very, very close to where the K is. It's where it needs to be. So let's summarize this, and then we'll take a break. People just learning to talk achieve fluency before they achieve precision. We saw that with our 3-month-old, 6-month-old, 10, 18-month-old, typically developing children. And Daniel, who at the time was 30 months old, of the You OK Kitty video. These fluent but often misarticulated syllable strings are reinforced by the verbal community, and we reinforce those as mands and tags. I know what you said, it was good enough. And it's not just an echoic, it actually means something. I'm going to reinforce that as a function, as part of your verbal community. I'm going to reinforce that as a mand, or I'm going to reinforce that as a tact. The verbal community tolerates these errors, if you want to call them errors, for years. Why? Because this is a mechanical skill that has to be practiced. and we in the verbal community know that these combinations, rapid connected syllable strings, is what we need in order to reinforce as mands and tags if we're going to have connected speech. Now, let me just make a little caveat statement and then we'll stop. We all understand that some humans are not capable of rapid connected speech. Those who have some neurologic problems, those who have been in accidents, Parkinson's disease, cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury, lots and lots of different reasons for that. And we make accommodations for that. But that's not the group of speech learners that I'm talking about today. We're talking about children with or learners with a diagnosis of autism who are not attending well to the auditory signal, and they're not responding well to our speech training efforts. And what do we need to know in order to select their speech learning targets in a more informed way? So let's take a 7-minute break, and then I'll meet you back here. For the second half, we will know when it's time to stop because they'll deliver hors d'oeuvres in here and they'll spread it, or not. Actually, they have hors d'oeuvres out there, right? Yeah. It's so impressive to see what Mike Miklos and his crew have put together for the past 20 years. This conference is so well run and it's so eclectic. It's really amazing. The program is wonderful. So our second half will be talking about 5 tools that you can use to help you determine what targets to select for working on speech. And again, I'll just kind of remind everybody that we're not, unfortunately, this is not a skill building workshop. I like to do those as well, where we're actually talking about how to reinforce and prompt and fade prompts and how to use the behavioral strategies that have come from the field of behavior analysis to impact speech and language acquisition, but that's not what this workshop is. So I'll remind everybody that we're talking about the considerations, things to consider in selecting vocal verbal targets. And so we'll take a look at 5 tools. In general, as you're thinking about target selection, keep the simple list in mind. Your job, our job, all of us, is to do 3 things. To identify what sounds does this child now make that are what I call available in the repertoire. This child can easily make these sounds. We need to know what those are. And we do that with some of the tools that I'm going to talk about, and one that I'm only just briefly going to mention that we call a vocalization baseline, which is essentially where you sit down for minutes on end and write down what you hear the child say. And then you make a list of all those different sounds. Very informal. But there are other ways to do that, and I'll show you some of them. We need to identify what the child's reinforcers are, preferred items or items that the child needs on a daily use basis, things that he sees and touches every single day. And that's the material for manned training, things that he wants, things that he needs to get through the day. And then what we're going to try to do is marry those 2 things. What can you say? What sounds can you make that are even closely related to what you want and what you need? So let's take a look at those tools. What we're trying to do, and I think you will see this form again later in another section of this afternoon's slides, but I like it because I made it. That's not why I like it. You too can make one of these. I like it because I was consulting in a clinic and someone said, I'm having trouble tracking those available sounds. What can this child say? And, and I had given them some other more complicated tracking pieces of paper that they found less useful. And that's one of the nice things I think about teaching is that we're always kind of in a state of making things better because people tell us, well, that didn't make any sense to me at all, or I found that laborsome to effortful to use, and so give me something better, give me something that I like better. So everybody kind of liked this. So I put the vowels along the top and some consonants along the y-axis, the leftmost column. And then all you do is, as you hear either one of those, you fill that in. Because this is the fodder for, and if you want to email me, I'm happy to send you this, but truly, you can easily make it probably before dinner time. This is the essence of speech. These are the little bits and pieces that are going to become words. Our job's to figure out how to combine them. And again, fluency over accuracy for really as long as we probably care. By the time you really care about accuracy over fluency, the child is already pretty much talking. That's not to say that we don't work on echoics. You'll see that it's the heart of almost everything that we do at this level. Note the words at the top. This is a speech tracker form for early skills, syllable acquisition, early skills. So what we want to know, as I just said, is how do any of those combinations map onto preferred items and daily use items? So the first tool that we're going to look at is what I call the naive listener test. I don't think I made this up, but I did make up the pieces of paper that we write stuff down on for this. And there may be one out there that's commercially available. I don't know. So the comments that I'm making here are about the one that you're going to see today. It's a way to measure intelligibility and its improvement over time. So by naive listener, we're talking about somebody that doesn't know what the person is saying. They can't see the picture. They're sort of blind to what the child is saying. So it gives us a pretty spot-on metric for, did I understand that? Which really means, is their speech response intelligible? So there are a lot of different ways that you could do this. This particular one, we use tags because you know what they're supposed to say because you've got a picture right there or an item right there. So anybody can give this. And the pass level is intelligibility. Now, what I tell people, and I just made this number up, is they'll say, well, what should their score be? So I say, well, what you're really asking is, how inaccurate can they be before and we can still understand them? And I don't know, but I would say it's probably somewhere around 70 to 90%. If you get much lower than that, then you're going to have a hard time reinforcing the verbal response. You're not going to understand what they're saying such that you can't reinforce it as a manned or attacked. It's not an articulation test, it's an intelligibility test, so don't kind of stop doing what you're doing and feel like you have to sort of fix the articulation. That's not what this particular tool is. It doesn't specify, it doesn't identify specific sounds or sound combinations that need to be targeted. Well, it would if you went through it with a fine-tooth comb and analyzed it all. But the results are intuitive. Anybody can figure out whether they understood it or not, and assign a score. But it's something that I have found, I use it with most of the folks that I work with, and parents find it very useful. They like it a lot because it's, as I said, intuitive. It makes sense, and it's easy to do. So you'll see this little cutie doing it with her mom, and this video should not be, the videos that are to come should not be shown. I'm talking to the guys in the back. Okay, so this isn't a video, but it just shows how you set it up. So the naive listener is sitting on a chair behind her so that they can't peek at the pictures, and she's sitting at a table with mommy. And if that's too hard or takes too long, or you don't have an extra person there, you can just simply audio tape it and then have them listen to it later. Say, what do you think she said? Now, what you have to do is you have to make a list of the order in which you're going to say show these pictures, so that you can go back and make sure that you're scoring it correctly, because this is an intelligibility test. Why are we giving it? Because they're not very intelligible. Okay. So what I recommend doing is giving 100 show 100 different pictures, 50 at a minimum. Why? Because we're going to get a percentage. And if you go much lower than 50, it skews that metric such that it kind of doesn't really mean anything. So get a goodly number of pictures. 100 is easy for a percentage count. And then show the pictures if your child isn't going to sit there and name all 100 of them, which I think if I would be ready to stab myself if I had to sit there and name 100 pictures. So you might want to do them in groups of 10 or whatever, and then come back to it later. So here are 6. You set it up like that. I'm going to show the picture of the camera, and then the person, the naive listener, doesn't see this list. They just have a number 1 and a line, and then they write down what they think the person said. Now, what we do is we use items that are already acquired as tags, and they might be acquired as signed tags. They might be acquired as speech tags, meaning, yeah, I told everybody that that's how she says butterfly or Cheetos. And everybody agrees that they're going to reinforce that when she says that vocal response. But really, I want to know, can anybody else reinforce it, or are we kidding ourselves here? Do we really need to work on this by making the articulation better? And so here's a partial list. And you can see that with this little girl, we have had 3 last year, this was last spring and summer, May, June, and July, Mommy gave this test 3 times. And then on the second test period, I went through it and I transcribed what she was saying exactly. I did transcribe it in phonetics, but I didn't put that in here, so that we could kind of then analyze that and get some more specific information. But again, that's not the purpose of this test. You don't have to do that. You can hand this to somebody else, like a speech pathologist, or if you do have these skills, then you can say, yeah, I think I can write that how it sounded, and then I can begin to look for some commonalities. Is she saying the vowels right? Is she leaving off all of her S's or the SH's, or what's the crime? What's the speech difference here that we need to work on? You can see that her results were 30% in the first test period, 38, and then 56 in the second test, or in the third test period. So I'm going to show you, don't show these videos. We have this is from the second test period, and it's the same word that she's saying for all 3 of these. I'd like you to try to figure out what it is. And you'll recall that for sample 2, she was at 38%. Sample 3, she was at 56%. So we have 2 from sample 2 and then sample 3.
What's this? Apple. What's this? Apple. What's this? Ball. What's this? Zipper.
Okay, so that was just to give you an idea of how it how it goes. It's pretty simple. Then here we are with her saying the same word on the bottom. Left the naive listener test number 2, sample 2, and then a year, I think, was it a year later? Maybe a few months later. Okay, there was that word. So what was that word? Well, here it is again. Did you get it the second time around? So the word was spoon. Quite a difference. Now, what you didn't see was all the articulation work that went on between those two. But the person that was scoring this, of course, was able to mark that, was able to write spoon. Yeah, I know what that was. So why don't you give it a go? Here, she's going to say 10 different things. Why don't you write down what you think she said? And we'll start after she says chips. Okay, so the 10 that come after chips. Just write down what you think she said. Okay, we all set? There's chips. That was 3. 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. Okay. So that's what she said. So if we were giving a percentage, did anybody give her 100% intelligibility? How about 90? 80? 70? 60? Well, now we get a lot of hands. Okay. 50? 40? 30? 20? Okay, so in 10, but so 60%, between 60, 70% intelligibility, at least the most of you. So that's not, our job's not done yet. So, so for shoes, she said shiz, and she should have said shoes. So the vowel is wrong. For chicken, she left off the final N. For cow, she left off the final R. For fish, well, that one was okay. For fork, the vowel at the end added a syllable that probably threw many of you off. Fork-ka. So you thought it was a 2-syllable word. I'm not sure what it was, but it's a 2-syllable word. We talked earlier about how to avoid developing that problem. Glasses, W for L. Grapes, the vowel was wrong, and there was a W for R substitution. Guitar omitted the final R sound. We give her a break because she doesn't live in the U.S. and they don't say their R's the same way. Sheep, the vowel was wrong, and dinosaurs, the vowel was wrong, and she deleted a whole syllable. So now your job is to say which one of these speech differences matters, given where she's at right now. Well, those of you that have ever been to one of my workshops know that the right answer is the vowels gotta be right first. But sometimes the vowel is only minimally different, and so we don't worry about that too much. But these are some possible targets, definitely. All of the wrong vowels. The W for L substitution on glasses doesn't concern us at all right now. Glasses for glasses, and you'll see why on a future slide. It's called a blend or a cluster of several consonants together that are not divided into different syllables. They're all part of the same syllable. It's one of the last things that kids learn to get right, way after they get all the vowels right and they're speaking quickly and so on and so forth. Definitely we want to clean up fork. That's a one-syllable word. It's not a two-syllable word. And since she happens to love grapes, we did work on the A vowel in grapes. Shoes as well. I'm not too concerned with the E in sheep because it's not a word that she says very often, but we did begin to look for other words that had E in them, like key. She has a game that she plays with mommy with keys, and so we addressed it in that way. The deleted syllable in dinosaurs is very common. We see that. You probably saw that with some of the first half videos. Daniel did that. You okay, kitty, instead of you are okay or you're okay, kitty. And we see that all the time. Buffy for butterfly, wawe for watermelon, those kinds of things. So we lose syllables for the advantage of speed again, but the vowels are one of the first things that kids learn to get right. And why? Well, it matters. That's why rhyming is so fun. You can guess what rhymes are if you substitute all the consonants. You can still guess. There's a game that we used to play on the computer called You Don't Know Jack, and they have some silly sayings where they've changed all the consonants, but the vowels are all correct. And it's real fun to try and figure out what they're saying. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that kind of does sound like that. And it's fun. The meaning is carried in English and most other languages by the vowels. If you substituted all the vowels and kept all the consonants right, you'd never guess what the person was trying to say. So vowels are vitally important. I threw this in, and I'm happy to send it out if anybody wants it, but it was just an example of how we're working on contrasting the difference in where the tongue should be to say the T sound versus to say the K sound, with a list of things that were important for this particular learner, and just a data keeping sheet for that. And we do these in contrast difference therapy for the SLPs out there. Okay, so that's a naive listener test. Let's go on to tool number 2, the echoic assessment. Now, it doesn't matter what echoic assessment you give as long as you're able to assess the repertoire. You can make up one of your own, or you can use one that already exists. Many apraxia tests are tests of the echoic. In fact, that's pretty much how we treat apraxia, is to work on a better echoic and then move it into Mann's and Tack's and so on. The echoic assessment that I'm going to talk about today is, I'm talking about this one because I know it, and it's divided into 5 groups, and this is how sounds and speech, the kind of the sequence of how it's acquired. And when we go to tool 3, the sound acquisition sequence checklist, you're going to see pretty much the same thing, only in a different format. So I like to include a lot of redundancy in the tools and also in what I'm telling you, because this is a hard job. You have to bring your A game to teaching somebody speech. And these kinds of workshops where you're talking in such technical detail about things can sometimes be difficult to listen to or to quickly understand what's a mand, what's a tact, or maybe you already know that. What's co-articulation? What's a deleted final consonant? So in order to help all of us kind of stay on track, I like to be redundant, and I think the early echoic skills assessment has some redundancy with tool number 3 that we'll see in a minute. Group 1, we're wanting to assess what do they do with vowels and some simple early acquired consonants, and can they do it twice? Can they say ma and then mama, ba, baba, and so on? It's reduplicated syllables. Group 2 is an assessment of what they do with 2-syllable combinations where the vowel changes or the consonant and the vowel changes. In group 1, it doesn't change. If you can say ba, it's probably not that hard to say ba, ba. But what about bay and bay? That one's easy. What about baby? Now my tongue has to move from the A to the E sound, so it's much harder. Group 3, we assess 3-syllable combinations, and group 4 and 5, we look at prosody. Prosody is another word for those suprasegmental skills in pitch, loudness, duration, and the emphasis that sort of goes along with that. Okay, so this is part of the VB map, the ESA, or the Early Echoic Skills Assessment. I can't remember the page that it's on, but it's fairly easy to give. I don't recommend that you give it all at once. I would pick a section at a time and give it. But the scoring can be a little dicey sometimes, so you probably ought to read that section ahead of time in the guide manual. So here's group number 1. What we're targeting are vowels, diphthongs, and these consonants that I wrote down there, P, B, M. Those are 3 and W. Those are consonants that are made that are very visible. Maybe one of the reasons that children acquire those first. You can see them. There's lots of acoustic information there because the P and the B, for example, are what we call plosives. You're exploding some air after building up a little wall. You close your lips, you build up the intraoral air pressure, and then you open them and all that comes out. And that's kind of a high, strong stimulus. The M and the N are nasal sounds. Well, that's kind of interesting. A lot of stimuli there. You can actually feel it going through the nasal cavity and the air resonating there. So these are early acquired, and there's nothing magic, I don't think, about why they're acquired in some of the first consonants that are acquired for the reasons that I just said. The stimuli that they produce, that those responses produce, are very salient as compared to or o, or some of those that we see being acquired much later. And then also I put one item in there to probe the T sound. And all you do is you ask the child to say what I say, and then you mark whether or not they could do it. A common error that we see is that people will set up their echoic targets that are specific to some of these too early. And what does that mean? That means that if you've got a child that really can't say 3 different vowels echoically, and you're not maybe even hearing them on a vocalization baseline, just, spontaneously in general when they're playing with their toys, they're not saying very much, or they're not saying very many vowels at all. I would not recommend selecting specific echoic targets. What we often do is select a range of targets. And so we'll sit down with a child and we'll reinforce almost anything that comes out of their mouth. And from the information that we get from their responses, we then begin to put those in groups. And we say, oh, yep, I'm hearing that one a lot. And I just heard this one too. Let's see if we can move those together and begin to build something that looks like a syllable or a couple of syllables together. So if your child is not responding fluently and quickly with at least 3 different vowels echoically, be very cautious about saying, we're going to have him say cookie. Because you might want him to say cookie, and he might really want the cookie, but it's probably like asking me to go out and play tennis with Vanessa Williams. You know, it's just, it would not be a pretty sight. So let's take a look at group 2. Now we're looking at some additional consonants, so all the first ones, as well as the ones in this group, K, G, T, D, F, Y, and the ing sound, or ing, that we looked at earlier. And the difficulty, as you can see, take a look let's take a look at the word window. So we have 2 W's in there. We have an N and a D together, but one ends one syllable and one starts the next syllable, but at least your tongue doesn't have to go anyplace. It can kind of hang out there. But you do have to go from the nasal to the not nasal sound. But you've got 2 syllables, 3 different consonants, and 2 different vowels in the word window. Very complicated. And so probably harder than bow wow, where all you have to do is the ow is the same, so the vowel stays the same, the consonant changes. We'll look at this again with our sound acquisition sequence checklist, but you want to start looking at the components, the vowels and the consonants, and how they're kind of juxtaposed together. What am I asking this child to do when I'm asking him to say chip? How hard is that anyway? And what if all he does is say eh? What if he says Is that worse than if he says eh? So we want to begin to map this. Group 3, 3-syllable combinations. By the time the child is echoing 3 syllables, what I want to know is, and if you ever hear anyone giving this echoic test or any other echoic test where they're beginning to break the syllables down, in general, now there may be some exceptions, but in general, what we want to know is, not can they say the 3 syllables separated, can they say them all together in about the same amount of time that we would normally say them. So if I say 1 cookie, it's not interesting information to me that the child can say 1 and then say cookie. If that's too hard, then you shouldn't be working on 1 cookie or a cookie or the cookie or want cookie. You should be working on cookie until you can get that. And what is cookie? Cookie is a 2-syllable word where the consonant stays the same, but it's not reduplicated, the vowel changes. So it's not cuh and it's not key, it's key. And that requires the tongue to go into a different position in the mouth from the sound before it. And we'll skip section 4 and 5 because we're not really talking about that too much right now. Here's an example, and this video should be off the early echoic skills assessment of just what it looks like when you're giving it.
You ready? Guys, in your chair. You want to write one? No, both of them? Yeah. Okay, guys.
Okay, so what happened there? What happened is that in his effort to say it precisely, he had to slow way down. So right away, we know we should not be working on 3-syllable targets. We should be working at the 2-syllable level, make sure all of the sounds that are related, the consonants, the syllables, and so on, that are related to what he likes and what he needs on a daily basis are available, that we're building something at the 1 and 2 syllable level with him so that we don't have to sacrifice fluency and speed. As soon as we can get that, we can add another syllable. So here's another way that we check the echoic. We give the anechoic assessment, the ESA or any other one that you want to give, but we also do some echoic quick checks. Some of you have seen this. I think the thing that I like about it is that it's fast moving. We get a whole bunch of targets at once. We don't use edibles because that takes time, and so we use tokens and we move it right along. But you'll see that you can embed in this run of, well, this is 17 trials, you'll see the specific detail of working, for example, on fa versus fa versus just the f sound. We rarely work on just one consonant all by itself because that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't, unless you say mm-hmm, or maybe that's the only one I can think of, or shh. That one means something too. But in general, a single consonant is not a useful thing to be able to do. And I don't care if they can go, oh, like that, because it's never going to occur like that in language, in spoken speech. It's going to be in a different position. We know that through co-articulation. I do care whether you can say al, il, ol, ul, and la, lo, li, lu, and so on and so forth. And so that movement from one sound to the next is absolutely imperative. Okay, so he's working on the ESA assessment, he's working at level 1, group 1. Reduplicated single syllables and reduplicated syllables, fa, ma, and so on and so forth. And because he had we started working with him when he was 2, he was, I think, 6 in this picture, and had just started to talk about a year, maybe 6 months to a year before that. Here's where we are, and now he's speaking fluently, and in fact, Mom said, sometimes I just want to tell him to be quiet because he talks too much, and then I would just go, oh, no, don't say that. So it's a nice problem to have. But at this level, you can see that echoically, he was still so glued to the echoic model, he just did not hardly take his eyes off her, that as soon as she started to say, he said fa. Why? Because he always said fa. We hadn't varied it enough. Fee, fo, and so, or uff, oof, eef, all the components of words. And so that's why we put the single F in there, just so that he would start paying attention to the stimulus. Okay, tool number 3 is the sound acquisition sequence checklist. And this is something I made up. You can make up one too if you want to, although this one took a little bit longer, so maybe you want me to email it to you. I believe that this is on the archives from either 2012 or 13 or 14, one of my previous presentations. You'll see it in a second. So what this is to identify, I wrote it for classroom teachers and parents, but primarily for classroom teachers who wanted to work on speech. The speech pathologist can't be there every single day, all day long, and so unfortunately, but the classroom teacher, they were being asked to sort of follow through, but also, you know, they really wanted to do a good job and be conscientious about, well, what can I do here? You know, they start talking and I don't even know, I just need something to kind of, a little checklist to help me pinpoint what they're doing right now. And so that was the impetus for putting this together. So, so it follows the ESA. It follows normal speech development. Vocal control practice comes first. So that's what you check first. Are they babbling? Are they making lots and lots of general vocalizations? And of those, what vowels are you hearing? Are you hearing more than 3? 3 is pretty much the minimum to start working on speech, because otherwise I want that and I'm going to call it ba, and I want that, and that one's ah, and that one is ba, and that one is ba ba. And you don't have enough variation in the speech response, the vocal response, for the response to be differentially reinforced. So we need different vowels. And then we see, after typically developing kids, after the vowels are in place, remember the 3-month-old? Pretty much vowels, pretty much all vowels. 90 days worth of working on just vowels for I don't know how many hours a day. By 6 months, we began to see the bwa, 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 but still an awful lot of just the ah sound, not a lot of movement of the tongue for the e or for the oo sound. Some, but not a lot. So we want to take a look at, on the checklist, consonants in 1-syllable, consonants in 2-syllable combinations, and then consonant blends back in 1-syllable combinations. Now, there are another 50 levels that I could have put on this, and this is what you learn when you become a speech pathologist, how to fine-grain the analysis of all of these different combinations, but this is enough for one little card. And the instructions that I'll skip today are on the back of what we do is we print it off and we laminate it on cardstock, and then people can check off, they can use it in the classroom and check off what's happening. So it looks kind of like a lot of stuff on here, so let's take it level by level. You'll see the 5 levels: vocalization, vowels and diphthongs, consonants in 1-syllable combos, 2-syllable combos, and then consonant blends. What is this? This is a sequence of difficulty. It's typical development. It's how children typically acquire sounds or speech responses. And so if your learner doesn't sound like you think he or she should, is not communicating effectively vocally, try and pinpoint here where they're at, and then that will inform your target selection. So first we want to know whether or not we're getting vocalizations in general. This came from Dan Ling, who was a speech pathologist, Dr. Ling from McGill University in Toronto. He spent his life working with people with profound hearing impairments. He's written books, lots and lots of articles. His workshops were wonderful to go to. He had a million different tricks of the trade of ways to teach various sounds. And I think that information that has been published on how to teach speech to people who can't hear the auditory signal has crossover value in using it for teaching speech to people who don't attend to the auditory signal. So you might want to take a look at it. And this was his sequence. Again, you see the same sequence as typical development. First, vocalizations in general. We want duration, loudness, and pitch changes, and we want several different vowels. Once we have that, we then start connecting those vowels to those early consonants and then later consonants. First, we work on reduplicating simple syllables, so ba, 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 me, me, and then we alternate the vowel, ba, be, ma, me, and we pay attention to where in the mouth the tongue has to be for all manner of consonants. Should it be in the front? Should it be just at the alveolar ridge, the gum line just behind the upper teeth? Should it be at the velar area, the soft palate, or the velum way in the back, like when you say k and g? Or are they palatal sounds, kind of in the roof of your mouth, your hard palate, oh, and so on. And then last, we worry about whether or not they put two consonants together in the same syllable. We will see cluster reductions or omitted sounds in blends for a long, long time, and we just don't care too much about that. Children that might say gween for green. Why? Because w is way easier than or r. To connect it to the g sound in green. Woo, we see it for blue, and so on. And the very last thing that Dr. Ling was concerned with, and it's one of the things that affects intelligibility the least in rapid connected speech, is whether or not you say a consonant voiced or voiceless. So S and Z, same consonant, same place in your mouth. One is unvoiced and one is voiced. Doesn't matter too much when you're speaking rapidly. F and V, K and G, T and D, P and B. It's not that they don't matter, but in rapid connected speech, you want to ask yourself, can the child do all these other things already? And if yes, then I'll be concerned with those things. Although you saw in the first half of the workshop how the voice and voiceless differences can help in target selection with the bag and back example. So sequential teaching is critical, as I just mentioned. So we would teach bye-bye before we would teach baby. Why? Because it's easier. Mommy before daddy, because front consonants are easier to see than the ones that are inside your mouth at the alveolar ridge. Now that doesn't mean how many moms in the world have ever said, you know what, I feed him, I change him, I put him to bed, I do it all, and what's his first word? Dad, dad. So it doesn't always work this way, but if you're selecting targets, mommy, it might be easier than daddy initially. Teddy before cookie, because the T is at the alveolar area in the front as opposed to in the back, the velar area. And then a caveat at the bottom that you can read. I think I want to skip this. I think that you have this. This is, I'll just quickly say that this is a redo, more information about making the signal more complex. And again, here we have written in phonetics, these are combinations of complex combinations of syllables together. And all of these different combinations are required to say some of those things at the top. And so you can see some of the difficulties in terms of the vowel changes, the consonant changes, the voice is on, the voice is off, the vowel is in this spot in the mouth, now it's in this other spot in the mouth. So let's be aware of these kinds of requirements for connected speech. So level 1, we're just going to make a check mark on, do we hear pitch differences? Do we hear loudness differences? You don't have to write down what they are, you just want to know. Do they make some sounds long, like ba, and some shorter, like ba, ba, ba? that kind of thing. And do they make a lot of sounds? Do they have a high vocalization baseline? High meaning 70, 80, 90% of the slice that you watch while they're playing alone. Do they babble? Do they make a lot of sounds? We'll skip this video. This is a quick vocalization baseline that we did over a 42-second sample, but you just want to put a little box in and say, yeah, this child is making quite a few sounds. That's good. We have some raw material that we can work with. So you check your boxes, you check your level, and you move on to level 2. If one of the vowels that they can make isn't on this sequence card, then write it in, as we did with the O. So we have at least three vowels. I think I wrote that on the instructions. I just made it up, but that's what criteria are. And so this child passes level 2. The speech pathologist will recognize this little schematic as the juxtaposition for vowels in the mouth for the way they resonate first and second formant frequencies. What I've done is I've kind of turned it on its side a little bit and flipped it. So this is a schematic that's available in the archives as well, and I call them the vowel neighborhoods. Again, if you're trying to select, if you're hearing vowels and you say, well, how, I mean, they're saying instead of I for in chip. They're saying they're saying instead of ip. That's all I can get out of them. Well, how far away is that? How wrong is that? Well, the is that upside down V, and the I is the one that looks like the capital I right next to the red lowercase I. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of other vowels in between, and if that step from to E is too big and echoic work isn't getting you there, no, it's not, don't say say I. And the child keeps saying, maybe you want to pick a baby step, something in the neighborhood. Well, let's see. What about, can you say or or eh? Maybe we can get that echoically. Now we're moving into the I neighborhood and the E neighborhood up at the top. So it's very helpful to know where's your tongue supposed to be if the child is not benefiting from your echoic model. We already heard this child. I think we will skip this video, and we basically hear lots of vowels, so lots of raw material to work with that child. And then we want to look at one-syllable combinations. And what are the consonants that you look at? Well, in general, the top row consonants are acquired by typically developing kids before the ones in the next row, and the next row, and the next row, and the next row, in general. And these are the consonants that when you are looking at these one-syllable combinations and listening to this child, you want to listen for, am I hearing any of those with any vowel? And then mark it. And then teach it as abandoned attacked. We won't spend much time on level 4 and level 5 because they get very complicated, but I've given you some examples there. Reduplicated syllables are always easier than mixed syllables where you're changing either the consonant or the vowel or both. And then consonant blends, that's our last concern this is kind of cleaning up the articulation at this point. So look at what they're giving you, how they're saying it, and make a determination about, well, stop marking the check marks on the SAS at the point where the errors start occurring in general. And that's where you know, oh, I should be working right here at this level. If you get all the way to level 5, you probably have a fluent speaker who's just saying some things wrong. And depending on how much of the time they're saying it wrong, which you'll find out from the naive listener test, you can decide whether or not to deal with it. And let me skip all these instructions and talk about shells for a minute. Shells, I got this word from Nancy Kaufman, and I emailed her one day, and Nancy Kaufman does a lot of work with apraxia in the Detroit area, and I said, well, you know that word shells, where you keep calling them shells? She said, oh yeah, it's not mine, because I said I have permission to use that word, and she said, yeah, but sure, you can have permission to use it, but I didn't make it up. I got it from somebody else, and I finally found where she got it, so I thought I better put it on this slide. So what shells are kind of a list of approximations that will help you figure out what the target should be. So writing targets in shells capitalizes on typical acquisition from simple to hard, and these typical errors, which aren't really errors, will tell you how to simplify what you're writing. So let's say that the word is blanket, and you've got a child who says either ba, or baka, or banquet. Which one of those is the one that is at the lowest level of skill? Well, I made it easy because I wrote these in order. Reduplication would be the target if all they say is ba, and you want them to say blanket. So first get ba. If they can say baka, that means they're leaving off that final consonant, so get backet. But I might not even worry too much about that, because blanket is probably going to have another word right after it, like please. And so you might not need the T on there for it to be intelligible. Cluster reduction occurs with banquet, and so you can either try for blanket, and I sure would test it, or try, and if you can't get that, put a placeholder in blanket, the W for the L. If you're having trouble thinking of where do I go next, you can also think about, well, what would this sound like in baby talk? They can't say blanket, so what should I be testing if I'm starting at blanket and going down instead of starting at buh and going up? Well, they can't say blanket. How would baby talk? What would that sound like? Blanket. What might be the one underneath that? Bwah, maybe. I don't know. Just kind of, there are a lot of different ways that children might say it. So you want to start kind of going down, well, although we select targets from the bottom up. Let's take a look at one of them. So butterfly, what if they only can say buh? Here's a shell for butterfly. There are a lot of different ways that shell writing is kind of arbitrary. You can say, well, and speech pathologists might say this to you sometime. Well, you can either have them for chip. If they say you can either try and go for ip or ti. And it really doesn't matter, and it really doesn't probably matter, depending on what their current skills are. But ba, and then bubba, buffa, buffy, butterfly, butterfly, and now we're getting close to butterfly. So let's take a look at chip. Let's say that the learner says, where do you start? Do you just work on chip? Do you work on the initial sound CH? Because that's missing. The S is missing, so maybe you should just work on chip. Or should you teach a substitute for the CH sound? Should maybe just tip. That kind of sounds like baby talk. Which one should you do? Well, there is at the top what you want them to say, chip, broken down into 3 phonemes, the ch, I, and p sounds. And currently they're saying So we write a shell, and if you go from the bottom up, the next one up is the vowel is too far afield, it's too wrong. So we need to get the correct vowel. Now you can tell from having seen the vowel neighborhood chart that there may be another couple shell lines in between getting from to I. You might have to go from to a to e to I to make it steps that they can actually meet, can actually respond to from the echoic prompt. And then you begin to fill in the missing sounds, and here's where it might not matter whether you fill in the one at the end or the one at the beginning. There are some sort of rules for that, but again, you have to look at your learner and you have to see what's easy for them. So you're always probing all the time the next higher level. Often, you do that many, many times a day. Well, if you can't say that, can you say it like this? No? Okay. What should I ask them to say next, echoically? Thinking in terms of shells will help you do that. Sometimes it's fine to put a placeholder in, like the T for the CH. So if the response is too hard, this is a kind of a stylized shell. You want what it is easier responses in gradual steps, and then you reinforce each one. So we get the reduplicated, and then we change the vowel from pa-pa to pa-po, and then pa-sho, because we have to get rid of that second P, and we've got to put something in there that sounds more like a Z sound. And why did I pick SH? Because I probed the responding many, many times, and that was the one that we could arbitrarily, that the child could get closer to in a response. And then we clean up the SH and we change the SH to an S. Why? Because S and Z are exactly the same sound, except the Z is voiced and the S isn't. And then, and again, the voiceless distinction is not a concern until we get the, very much, for me at least in this example, until we get the placeholders in place or the correct consonants in place. All of the consonants. And with paso, even though there's an H there, I only wrote that just so that you could kind of say it to yourself. But it really is a vowel. It's ending in a vowel, and the final consonant is missing. So we need something that sounds like that. And then we have it. Same thing for cat. If the child says tut for cat, see where the a is on the vowel neighborhood chart, and where the child starts with ah. They're right next door to each other. Not a big problem. But we do want to get that, I think, okay, with this example, what I decided was a bigger problem was that we needed to fill in some placeholders for the T. So we left the ah like it was, and we taught tot. And then we cleaned up the vowel to tat, and then cat. And I think we'll skip these. So some people like to use this echoic demand sequence card. Again, this is on the archives. We print this, laminate it so that people can write on it and then erase it. But what we're looking at is what is the prerequisite sound that they have to make in order to say, for example, balloon. They have to either say the vowel oo or the vowel And then echoically, our target is ba, to try to get a consonant. So we're a consonant vowel, very, very low level, level 2 on that SAS card. And then as soon as that is acquired as an echoic skill, that becomes the new syllable that we're going to reinforce as a mand or as a tact. So we tell everybody, when they say ba, that means balloon. And in our echoic work, we now move up the ladder to ba-oo, and then as soon as they acquire that, that becomes the new mand that we are slowly raising the bar. That now you have to say ba-oo. And I know you can do it because you just did it over there echoically. And if we're working on tact training, we might just put the picture down so that we're not saying ba-oo. That it may matter with listener discrimination training later. So we just kind of put it down. We go over and we run a sideshow over here of ba-oo, 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 ba-oo until we get that. And then, and as soon as we get it now, What's this? Ooh, that's right, balloon. We don't say we still say balloon, but we reinforce their effort. So you can see how this goes. Here's one for Cheeto, which somebody reminded me that, and I'm surprised that they needed to do this because I would fight people for Cheetos. There actually is an S on the end of Cheetos. And another one for music. You have all of these in your packet. We don't have time today to practice, but here's one for Chip. And I wrote a second column on the far right column because I wanted you to see that there are better selections, but there aren't dyed-in-the-wool correct selections to pick. So don't worry if you think, oh, well, I'm not sure I'm picking the right syllable here. You can always check with someone else, but in general, follow the sort of the information that you've already learned today. We know we need a vowel, and then we want to put a consonant on. It might not matter whether the consonant's at the end or whether you pick the one that goes at the beginning. Don't freak out just because you don't have your CCC in speech pathology. But you want to consult if it's at all available to you to make sure that you're making the wisest steps that you possibly can. And again, I wrote these for classroom teachers. So how do we know when to advance a target up and down? As soon as they can say something easily, immediately build it into a mand-intact opportunity. That's what verbal behavior is all about. I will encourage you to respond, though, to lower performance. Why? It's not hard to respond to higher performance, but you're working with children whose speech skills are very wobbly, very. And many of them have already worked for years, and they've had bad experiences in doing so. So you can be a different stimulus in their life. You can bring fun and games and lightness to this. And I would encourage you, I always encourage parents, take the long view. This is for typically developing children that are looking at you constantly and paying attention to all the stimuli. It still takes years to get this skill down pat. And for children who have difficulty attending to stimuli, I think we need to be realistic, and I think we need to keep our eye on the ball. I'm very, very reluctant I'm not reluctant to recommend AAC systems and devices. I'm reluctant to recommend giving up on speech training. And there have been a couple of times when I have done that, but after having my own eyes on things for up to a year, sometimes making sure that we're getting 8,000 trials a day, and yes, we're building this into MANS, and yes, people do know how to reinforce, and yes, we're basing these things on the stimulus preference assessment. We're not just sort of selecting willy-nilly syllables from someplace. And there may come a time when that decision is the appropriate one to make, given other priorities in this person's life. But I would say encourage you to take the long view while you're working on this. Okay, let's wrap up with tool number 5, vocal verbal skills. And again, I'll remind you that interdisciplinary collaboration is a great advantage to the learner. And I would thank a colleague of mine, Lena, for pointing out recently that we're not talking about multidisciplinary, which simply means a collection of people that sit on the team. Interdisciplinary requires cooperation and collaboration and interaction and agreement and moving the child's program forward together with respect for one another's separate skill sets, but also with the willingness to help our interdisciplinary partners teach in such a way that this child will be successful. So you have the quote for this at the reference for this quote at the bottom, the Kelly article that you might want to take a look at in JABA from 2007. A vocal response may be functionally independent under different environmental conditions, despite similarity in topography. So people might say, yeah, okay, so what? This quote speaks directly to behavior analysts that you are responsible, you should be knowledgeable about. It's within your purview to concern yourself with speech and language communication skills. By the word, a vocal response. By the word topography. What does topography mean? Form, sequencing of sounds, segmental components and suprasegmental components of speech. Who knows about that? Speech pathologists. By the same token, speech pathologists are being spoken to directly here. Functionally independent under different environmental conditions. It's on all of us to know what those things mean. That means that, hey, I'm working on the topography, that is the sequence, the form of the response. It's vocal, and I'm working on it in changing environmental contingency conditions that we call functional language, man's tax, so on, verbal behavior. So this is a form that what is this, a sign. We had these printed up. I made this up for some classrooms about what are the ABC contingencies. What is a tact? What's a mand? What's an echoic? What's an interverbal? And the A are the white boxes, the antecedent conditions. In the yellow is what the learner does. That's the response. The B, the behavior. And then the blueprint boxes are the C, or the consequences. These are what we call functions or contingencies, the ABC condition. These are the conditions that when those conditions exist, we're going to call that a tact. We're going to call that a mand, an echoic, an interverbal, and so on. And this is not a workshop on verbal behavior, so I won't say more about that. But what you want to ask yourself is, are any of these responses vocal? And so you need to track that. And so that's why I call this a tool. So tracking whether their verbal behavior is in fact vocal. And there are reasons to do that, and I'll show you the tracking form. I think I've got that pretty much at the end. But here's our little gal again, and this video should not be on recorded, but here's our little gal with mommy, and I'd like to play it all, but it's kind of long, so I'll just play a couple minutes. But they're doing a preferred activity. They're reading a book, which she loves. She loves being with mommy, and what we were doing is trying to shorten the duration of her 2 to 4 syllable combinations. Why? Because she could say them, but she had to say them all separately. Butterfly, and that's non-functional. So we were trying to shorten those up. That was our vocal target. Our verbal target was echoics, tacts, and interverbals, and we were collecting data from echoic and tact probes and data from the naive listener test. I'll let you watch just a little bit of it. you see the difficulty with whole syllable deletions, lots and lots of repetition. Oh no, oh no, oh no, run, 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 run. I can't remember what the other word was where she separated it out. Just way too long. Puddle. It doesn't even sound like puddle anymore. I wasn't sure whether she was saying two different words or exactly what. So, but this is what it looks like connected. This little girl had 3 years of speech pathology work by people that were very well-meaning, and I've been in email contact with them, and they're absolutely wonderful. But what they said was, we thought that we should be focusing on precision over fluency, because when she talks, she can be very fluent. And so we didn't think that fluency was really the issue. So we talked about, yeah, general fluency isn't an issue, but fluency with 2-syllable and 3-syllable words is a problem. They're too slow. We need to speed the fluency up, but we need to keep our eye on the articulation ball as well. So it took a kind of lot of back and forth of working on getting those targets just exactly right. I want to quickly just point out, and I'm happy to send these out to you, so please don't feel like you have to quickly write it all down. It's the same form for that one and this one, but if you look up in the upper right-hand corner, wait a second, now I've forgotten which one came first. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay. What's written in the boxes are the antecedents for the bread, peanut butter plate, and knife. For the targets, these are vocal, we're trying to get vocal responding because we have the echoic in here as well. But we're trying to work not just deep, that is, with different topographies, bread, peanut butter plate, and knife, but we're trying to work broadly across the verbal functions. And so, in general, when you're working on mand and tact targets, what you want is a few related targets that you can work on mands and tacts and some imitation and so on and so forth. It's what real life looks like. It's what real play looks like. We don't just work on 30 trials of LR, of listener responding, and then 30 tact trials, and then 30 echoic trials. It looks like making a peanut butter sandwich. It looks like playtime. And so what we did was made up this data sheet for folks, and on this one, they're tracking whether the teacher is providing the correct antecedent. On this one, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, the data format is the response. This is what the student has to do for me to mark it right. And so you can see under the echoic what some of the vocal targets are: pina for peanut butter, poi for plate, and so on. So this is just an example of a form that you might use to track putting these targets into an activity. You saw this earlier. Just a reminder that these are the first 3 types of kids that we typically see coming to us with a diagnosis of autism. Those that don't respond to any echoic model, and the target is to increase the vocalizations in general, because that's the way it typically works with typically developing kids. Once we've got that going, the little boy that you saw in the ESA, the echoic assessment, he was at this level, inconsistent responding to the echoic model. So we would say this, not on the video you saw, but we would say this, and sometimes he'd say it, and sometimes he wouldn't say anything. So our target is to reinforce any response. We can't really call it an echoic because there's no match point-to-point correspondence, but that's the first thing you have to do. If your child doesn't respond to echoic models 100% of the time, given the fact that they're paying attention and that they're not, watching the airplane fly by or something. In general, they're not yet ready to move to the next level of requiring point-to-point matching. There's no sense saying to them, in effect, with your targets, you have to say it perfectly when you're not even saying something after every echoic model. So first get consistent responding after the echoic model, and then worry about cleaning up the articulation. Let's check our time here. I think we'll skip our videos. This is just him not responding to every single, well, actually, we'll skip the second one, show it a little, this one. So now we're reinforcing anything, almost anything that comes out of his mouth in a play environment. So the vowel was wrong, but he said something. And we got for mama, and so on. So you can see he's now.
Which one does not belong? How come? The dolphin doesn't belong. Do you know why? Because these are all what? They're all vehicles. Is the dolphin a vehicle? No, that's silly, isn't it?
Okay, so yeah. So we started at the right place, and that took about 6 months to get to that point. It's not always that fast. It's often 6 years, but that's where you're headed. And I like to show this because it shows where we started. I think, let's skip this. These are not important. But I did want to show you just the last couple of slides that when you're tracking, I mentioned I'd show you some tracking forms. When you're tracking what kids can do, whether of these words they can emit it vocally as a mand or a tact or an interverbal, you want to have a form that sort of looks like this. And where we got this was we have a list of about 300 words. This is part of that list that I call a core vocabulary, but maybe I shouldn't call it that because I read someplace where somebody, yeah, so they're now calling it, but I probably said it first. I probably didn't say it first, but what it meant to me when I was working with some teachers, maybe I need to change this title, is that what we're trying to do when I started working with children and consulting in classrooms for kids with a diagnosis of autism, people were they were willy-nilly choosing words. And so what we talked about was what you want is a common group of maybe 200 to 300 words. And put them in categories, which they are on this list, and tailor-make it for that particular child. If he's got a guinea pig and he doesn't have a giraffe at his house, then put guinea pig on there and take giraffe off. Or if he goes to synagogue and not church, then flip that one around or whatever. If his sister, Cece, her nickname is Cece, then put her name on there and so on and so forth. But in general, there are 200 to 300 words that we're trying with these kids that aren't talking and that have aren't talking in terms of mands and tacts and so on, or emitting those language responses in any other way, sign or picture selection or whatever. Our job is to work those topographies across the verbal operants. That's our job. And if we can do that vocally, that's even better. And so we need some sort of a tracking system if we're focused on vocal acquisition. And this is the one that it's an easy one to do, and all you have to do is check it as soon as you see it occur vocally under any of these verbal conditions. So to end, we'll just kind of summarize here with the difference between a man-tact contingency and an echoic contingency. Again, this tool is talking about vocal verbal tracking and knowing which one we're working on. The question that you want to ask yourself with an echoic, so when you're doing echoic work, you want to reinforce precision. So if it's not precise, then present a different echoic. And if it's not consistent, it's even worse than not precise, it's not even consistent, then start there, as I said a few slides back. But as soon as you're getting 100% responding to the echoic model, what you want to say is it precise? That's the criterion for reinforcing an echoic. That's not the criterion for reinforcing a mand and a tact. The criterion for those is it intelligible? Can somebody understand it well enough to reinforce it? And then work on these two back and forth all day long. As you're doing mand and tact training, you may have to take a side trip over here to beef up the echoics and then jump right back into the mand tact training again. Selecting your targets for mand tact from the ESA, the SAS, the NLT, and most importantly, preferred items and activities. You're marrying, if you notice, we're just saying it again, but in a different way. You're looking at the available sounds and marrying those with preferred items and activities. For an echoic, select your targets pretty much in the same way. You can write them on that echoic demand card if you want to. For early learners, reinforce almost everything that comes out of their mouths so that they want to run to you, as Mark Sundberg says, and not away from you. Particularly if their vocal repertoires are weak or if there are behavior problems. And by weak, I mean they don't say something every time you say something, or it's not a very strong auditory signal. Embed the vocal practice into most of their activities all day long. You can't work on speech from 2 to 2:10 and from 9:15 to 9:30. It's just not enough. You have to find some rubric that works for you. And I've given a lot of different suggestions to folks, and different people like different things. Some people say at the end of every 5 minutes, we're going to work for a minute just on vocalization. Somebody else says, we're going to get 100 vocalizations in this next 10-minute instructional segment, whatever it is we're working on, and I'm going to click the clicker until we get to 100. Some people will say, every 15 minutes, we're going to spend 5 minutes singing songs and doing other sorts of vocal work. So it doesn't matter, but you need to remember that it has to be sprinkled in like salt and pepper. It can't simply be isolated practice. And then simplify the shell components. And we'll end with a great definition of communication, I think. So I want to ask yourself, is what you're working on functional? Do you have an eye toward moving what it is, where are you going with this vocal practice? You want to be going into speaker-listener skills, functional skills. Is it fun? And does it build on already acquired skills? So with that, thank you, and please feel free to email me if you need anything or if you have any questions. It was great to have you all here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Esch. This is session 7, presenter Barb Esch, and the code is P as in Paul, I as in igloo, T as in Tom, 199. PIT 199. Thank you.